Eu pensei que ele
I should get up there and talk with you.
I know it's hard to keep a group of Portuguese speakers from continuing the conversation. We invite you to continue that after our fantastic presentation coming up.
Fantastic. He's saying, see it after.
Too much noise, too much noise. It is our pleasure to once again host Dr. Flávio Limoncic at Pitt. He was here last year. This year, we have an increased or more intense involvement with him. Today, he's making this presentation, and tomorrow he starts a pop-up course over the weekend. Today's presentation will be actually something that we find important and significant, especially when shown in a place like the United States, where it's a perspective from abroad, a look at the United States from abroad. And this is not something that happens that often in this country, but it's something that does happen around the world. And so it's clearly an important perspective to take into account. Dr. Limoncic is a professor of history at Rio, the Federal State University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He will be talking about a perspective from Brazil on the United States, especially focused on the 20th century. And tomorrow, his course will be on Jewish migration to Latin America. So I invite you to consider both. I will also say that next week we will have yet another interesting perspective from outside of the U.S. into the U.S. And that will be future doctor Esteban Correa, who's visiting us from the University of Costa Rica. But without further ado, I'm going to leave you with Dr. Flávio Limoncic.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for coming here today. Have a good meal. And I've already had my slices of pizza. And when we talked about what I could do with you today, what kind of aspects I could talk about with you. First of all, my English needs a little warm up. Okay? So when we first talked about what subject we could discuss here today about the United States, because it's a huge subject, I decided to focus on the welfare state. Because your welfare state is very different from ours. And but before talking about the welfare state, since the overall talks about US seen from Brazil, I would like to talk a little bit about how the United States is seen from Brazil. Because the United States has always been like a mirror to Brazil, a role model to Brazil. What Brazil should be or what Brazil shouldn't be. Since the empire, Brazil was an empire in the 19th century, 18th century, 19th century. I'm translating Portuguese English. Brazil was an empire. The United States was the first republic in the world, first modern republic. Many Latin American countries, Hispanic countries, when they became independent, the United States was the model, and they created constitutions inspired by the American Constitution. But Brazil took a different path. Brazil became an empire, but the United States was a model. Federalism, republic, And so a huge body of social thought was developed in Brazil, in Latin America in general, but in Brazil in particular, about this country. So I put here 3 examples of thinkers who thought about the United States. The first one, in 1833, just after the proclamation of Republic, Eduardo Bolsonaro, who was a member of the Paulista. Eduardo Prado. You know what? I was reading the newspaper before. I'm sorry. I was reading the newspaper before coming here. And they are all in jeopardy.
Yes.
The whole Bolsonaro family is perhaps going to jail. So have they in mind. So, Eduardo Prado, I'm sorry.
Eduardo Prado.
Eduardo Prado. Eduardo Prado was a very important member of the Paulista, São Paulo State Elite. And since the proclamation of the Republic, the Brazilian Republic was born again with the American Republic as a model. Our Constitution, the first Republican Constitution, Brazil's name was the United States of Brazil, and the main aspects of this new Constitution were inspired by American Constitution. So Eduardo Prado, he wrote a book called A Ilusão Americana, The American Illusion, in which he thinks that the United States shouldn't be the model to Brazil, because it was very individualistic, materialistic. The whole society, the whole American society shouldn't be the role model for Brazilian society. Monteiro Lobato, who was a Brazilian writer, he was fascinated by the United States. He was particularly fascinated by Henry Ford. And he thought that Brazil should follow the steps of Henry Ford and of the American society to become a modern country. So he was the opposite of Eduardo Prado. And then Oliveira Viana was a very important Brazilian authoritarian thinker that in the 30s, he wrote many works, and he said that in these works, he said that the United States should inspire Brazil. But since our history was different from your history, we couldn't have the same step, we couldn't take the same steps to become a modern country. We should respect our history, our Iberian roots, and to become American, we should take Iberian steps to become American, to become modern, so to speak. So these 3 thinkers, they show different views of how the United States should be seen, a very negative, a very positive, and also positive view of America, but with a different approach to get to where America was as a modern country. But always the United States has been in the discussions about the Brazilian social thought. The central item, the central problem of Brazilian social thought was how to become modern, how this very backward country with deep Iberian roots, which steps we should take to become modern. So the United States has been always this model. But also in the Brazilian imagination, social imagination, the United States is very present, either as a positive model, like the Man in the Moon, Disneyland, New York, modernity, but also on the other hand, wars all over the place, all over the world, imperialism, the support the United States gave to the Brazilian military coup and the military regime in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s. So also in the Brazilian imagination, the United States is always present as a positive role or a negative role. So what we are trying to do in Brazil now, we have this network of American studies. It's a group of scholars that take part that we are trying to understand better American society, because the United States, even though the United States is the most powerful country since at least World War II, and has a huge role in Brazil, American history and American historiography are not very well known in Brazil. Just in the last 10, 15 years, Brazilian scholars, historians, political scientists, and sociologists, they are beginning to study American society and American history. And I'm glad to be part of this effort. And but we are taking the first steps. Not only we study very little American history in Brazil, but also we translate little. Brazilian publishing houses, they don't have the usage, the habit of translating and publishing in Brazil books about American history. Aside from some subjects like slavery, others, we don't know much about American history in Brazil. So this network of scholars is trying to fill this gap. And we are talking today a little bit about the American welfare state. How Brazilians see the welfare state, like this. A Brazilian citizen, when look at the welfare state, American welfare state, sees nothing. Because compared to Brazilian welfare state, and we are a much poorer country than the United States, but compared to our welfare state, your welfare state here looks like a huge empty space. Because Brazilian social security system, Brazilian welfare state, unlike yours, our system is written into the Constitution. The Brazilian Constitution is very different from the American Constitution. The American Constitution, Articles 1, 2, 3, they say how the political system works, but our Constitution, it's probably larger than the Bible. It's a very big book in which lots of things are written, including social rights and labor rights. It's all in the Constitution, the Brazilian Constitution that was written in 1988. So our social security system, our public health system, which I'm going to talk about a little later, our social assistance policy, and our public education, they are all written into the Constitution, the Brazilian Constitution. So, for instance, public education. I work, as Manuel said, I work in a federal university. Brazil has 27 states. Every state has a federal university. Sometimes more than one. In Rio, there are 4 or 5 federal universities, and they are all completely free. We pay through taxes, but the students, they don't pay anything. Our public health system, we have something called SUS, Sistema Único de Saúde. It's completely free. It's funded by taxes, by all Brazilian citizens, but it's completely free. Since a broken leg till a transplant of heart, everything is for free in the Sistema Único de Saúde, even for those who are not Brazilians. So nothing's gonna come to Brazil, nothing's gonna happen. If something happens while you are in Brazilian soil, anything happens. You can go to an emergency room and you will be treated, and you leave hospital with no bills to pay. Since a cold till a heart transplant. And it has problems, it's underfunded and management problems, but it works. So I'll put here some examples. This is Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro, the campus, the museum, buildings of the university for free. You don't pay anything. Here is SUS, Sistema Único de Saúde. From ambulances till oncology, everything is free. Tax funded. So this SAMU, for instance, it's a system of ambulances. This is from Ceará state, which is a state in the northeast. But wherever you are in Brazil, if you have any problem, you call 192, and an ambulance will pick you up. Yes.
Turn that transcript thing off so that people can see that.
So these are some examples of the Brazilian welfare state, and a Brazilian historian like me looking for the American welfare state, very small. Since you have SUS, yours is a little tiny thing based basically on Medicare, Medicaid, food assistance, like the structure of, as far as I know, as far as I understand, reading the literature, your welfare state is based on focused constituents, like people in need. It's not a right of the citizens as a general, but only people in particular need, or elders or very poor. These are the people that are the main concern of your welfare state. It's different from our welfare state, where the rights, the social rights, are seen as a citizen's rights. Here in the United States, the welfare state is structured just with the focus, would you say focus, on particular groups of people in particularly difficult situations in life. That's the main difference between the Brazilian social welfare, Brazilian welfare state and the American welfare state. So the question that doesn't want to be silenced, why the United States, being so richer than Brazil, has such a smaller welfare system than Brazil? Not only Brazil, smaller than many countries. To try to answer that, we should first try to define what the welfare state is and make a little conceptual discussion about it, then to get into the American case itself. So we could define a welfare state, a state which has the approach that the social security of individuals, of everybody, in an economy based on wages, cannot be the exclusive responsibility of the individuals themselves through their insertion in the labor market. Is the translation is good enough?
Yeah.
So the Google translator helped me here. But sometimes it's not so good, Google translation, but through their insertion in the labor market, but must to some extent be ensured by the nation state. So, and I'm basing this definition in two authors, Carl Polanyi and Benedict Anders. So we could, if you want, we can talk about it later. But the point that Carl Polanyi makes is this. In the 19th century, in the United States, in Europe, and in the 20th century in Brazil, later in Brazil, there was this huge transformation in the economy, in society itself. In the 19th century, the market economy appeared. An economy based on salaries. Before 19th century, people lived in the countryside, they had orchards, they had cattle, they had access to wood, they had access to social networks around the village, neighbors, families, the noble in Europe, the local noble. In 19th century, with industrial revolution, urbanization, people became wage earners. And all their living was based on wages. They should pay rents, they should buy food, their daily lives had to be bought through wages. So this is what Polanyi calls the market society. But market society and wages, they don't take into account that the lives of people go further than wages. For instance, somebody gets sick, can't work. If his surviving depends only on wages, on the setting of their labor force, how can he or she survive if she's sick? If a woman is pregnant and gives birth, women get pregnant and give birth. A child doesn't work, a baby doesn't work. If someone gets sick in an old age, or cannot work anymore because it's too old or too sick. So there are elements of the cycle of life that were not contemplated by the wages. So the welfare states, they were the first measures of social protection were demanded by society to cover these kind of situations. Sickness, old age, pensions, and things like that. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. Okay. So, Gösta S.P. Andersen, he's a Scandinavian sociologist. I'm not sure if he's Danish or Swedish. And he developed a conceptualization of welfare states in 3 types of social welfare states. The first one is the social democrat. Brazil has elements of social democrat welfare state. The basic idea that the social democrat welfare state, it was built by social democratic parties or governments led by social democratic parties, most times in coalition with other parties. But the kernel of the social democratic type is that society is heavily taxed, rich and poor, but particularly rich because it's a progressive tax system. So society is heavily taxed, and the state redistributes wealth through social services. So doesn't matter how much you contribute through taxes to society, you will get the same benefit, the benefit you need. And for instance, a low wage earner, if he needs any kind of social service, he will get the same service as a rich person, even though the rich person pays more taxes than the poor person. So in Brazil, for instance, SUS, our health system is, in this sense, social democratic. In this sense, because I pay more taxes than somebody who doesn't even contribute to the social system, but you will get the same quality of service. The conservative forgot testing understanding. The conservative type is the German one, and the French and Italian. It was built by Christian democratic parties. And the aim of the conservative ones is to maintain, whereas the social democratic redistributes wealth, the conservative keeps the structure of society. So those who contribute more will get better benefits than those who contribute less. And the United States represents the liberal type of welfare state. In the liberal type, the United States, your welfare state was built through 30 years from the New Deal to the Great Society by one party, the Democratic Party, basically. And it has a very small social security system, usually complemented by private plans of private pension plans, how to say, retirement plans. So because the amount you can get through social security is low, so middle class and upper classes can pay more to have a private plan, retirement plan. But usually poor people, they have only the social security, which is very small. The public services are aimed at people in situations of risk, social risk. And the health system is also focused on some segments of people. The Medicare and Medicaid, there's a doctor here. That Medicare and Medicaid are only for the very poor and the old, meaning those who are not publics that the private plans are interested. Private plans are interested in those who can pay and won't use very much. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question. I know when you talk to people in Canada that have a public health system, what you may hear from them is that, yes, they have a public health system, but a lot of people decide to pay more to use a private system.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered, in Brazil, is that something that happens? Do you have another level that some people that have more money would access kind of a more private medical professionals?
That's a good question, because we do have also private plans. So in Brazil, we have the SUS, this universal plan, and we also have private plans. Most middle class people, and upper class people, rich people, they pay private plans.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
But if you have an accident at the street, everybody is taking, if you call the ambulance, the public ambulance, everybody goes to the public system. Middle class, rich people, whoever gets an accident at the street goes to the public system. And also the private plans, they usually don't pay extremely complex
Procedures.
procedures. Thank you.
Right.
So even middle class people, rich people, they go to the public system. I'm going to give you an example, a family example. Some 4 years ago, my father had to be an operation. He made a transfusion, a blood transfusion. By that time, there wasn't much control of the quality of the blood, so he had hepatitis C. So unusually, the virus was very quiet for 30 years, but a few years ago, the virus started to develop in his liver. Kidney, liver, but his liver. So his private plan doesn't cover the procedure, the treatment. So he went to SUS, And the SUS, he was, by that time, he's 90, he's alive. By the time he was 84, perhaps 85, if he went to a private practice, not his health plan, not his private health plan, but if you went to a private doctor to make the treatment, it would cost him $50,000. 50 mil dólares, né? $50,000. He went to SUS and he made all the treatment for free. So middle class and lots of transplants, middle class people use the SUS. What? Cancer, diabetes, hemodialysis. What?
Does SUS attract the better doctors as well?
Nope. Sorry.
Yes and no.
Because when I went to Brazil, I just knew that most people went to these private plans. When I saw the hospital that the poor people went to, it's a little scary.
Well, it's hospitals in general are scary.
Yes, they are. I agree.
But
No matter where you are.
so SUS, yeah. Now most of hospitals in Brazil that SUS provides healthcare, they are private hospitals. SUS pays the bills, but the hospitals, most of them are private. And of course, like here in the United States, if you're a good doctor, you can make a lot of money. And if you are a government doctor, you'll be paid the wages, the salary of a civil servant. So, but it's kind of I'm not sure if I agree with you.
Withdraw what I said. I shouldn't have said.
Because also, like public university hospitals, the doctors are either professors or they are hired by the professors. So public federal hospitals in the federal universities, they are usually very good. The institutes in USP, and the Medical Center in Universidade de São Paulo, they're highly qualified. If you have an accident, private doctors don't even know how to deal with first aids. So you go to a public hospital. They are very good at that. Brazil has lots of accidents, lots of bullets flying around. So people are taken to these hospitals, and they are very well cared in this hospital. So it's of course, if you have the best specialist in a very particular kind of cancer, you go to a private practice, a private doctor. So the United States, the American welfare state is, according to Augusta Ashton Anderson, it's a liberal state, which characteristics I have just mentioned. The core of the liberal welfare state is that it's aimed just to a certain kinds of people in need, not to everybody as a citizen's right. So why is it liberal, the American state, welfare state? Well, of course, cultural aspects are important. A country that has this very exceptionalist narrative about its origins, very individualistic, a story based on this idea that everyone must take care of himself or herself. These cultural aspects are important. The other day we were also, we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah.
We're talking about it. But besides these aspects, I think there are institutional aspects that I think they are also important. And now I'm gonna talk about a little bit about these institutional aspects. And here, the inspiration I had to think about these things was a book by Robert Dow, which is an American political scientist, a very important American political scientist. And his last, I have a political scientist here. I hope I'm not talking. What? Many. I'm terrified here. But Robert Dow inspired me to think about the American welfare state in institutional terms, and particularly his last book, the book he wrote a little bit before his death, which is a book called, in English should be, I read in Spanish, but in English should be, is the American Constitutional democratic or something like that? It's a question, it's an interrogation, it's a question. Is the American Constitution democratic? And he says the answers he gives to this question is that the American Constitution has lots of democratic problems. So much so that he wrote another very important book called Polarity, in which he says there is no political regime which is completely democratic. It's not the government of the demos, of everybody. It's the government of many, the polarchy. So the United States has many democratic problems written into the Constitution. And of course, the Constitution was written in the end of the 18th century by a slavery society. One of the main concerns of the people who wrote the Constitution was to preserve slavery. And so this Constitution has lots of democratic problems. And I think that these democratic problems help to explain, besides cultural aspects and everything, but these constitutional problems help us to understand why the American welfare state is liberal. One of the aspects of the Constitution that allows this kind of social welfare state is federalism. Brazil has also a federalist constitution, but in our history, the first federalist constitution was the first Republican constitution, 1891. And before this first federalist constitution, Brazil had a very centralized state, the imperial state. So our federalism was born from a very centralized state. And throughout the Brazilian history, we have these moments of more centralized state, more federalism, more decentralized state. But our federalism is gives much more power to the federal state than your state, than your constitution. You were born out of 13 colonies that became 14 states that united and became the United States. Even the name of the country mentions federalism, United States. And so your federalism gives much more power to the states than to the federal government. And actually, the history of the American state from the 18th century till today is this tension between states and union. Union wanting more power and the states wanting to preserve power. And something completely different from your country than our country is that we are Brazilian citizens, whereas you are citizens of the union and of the states in which you live. And the Constitution gives to the states in which you live many powers that, in the case of Brazil, are the powers of the central state, For instance, in Brazil, in Portuguese, it's complicated, but in English, for me, it's even more complicated. So, if you don't understand, please raise your hand, okay? In Brazil, the whole electoral system is defined by Congress. Who can vote, how vote, huh? The age of voting, the rules of voting. We have a branch of the justice just to take care of elections, Tribunal Superior Eleitoral. We have laws that rule the political system, the political parties. We have something called Lei Orgânica dos Partidos. All parties, they must function the same way in the whole Brazil. So if you live in Acre, which is a state, or in Pará, if you live in Pará or Maranhão, and I live in Rio, or São Paulo, né? And I live in Rio, we have the same voting rights. We vote in the same way, and our vote has the same weight in the whole country. Whereas here, the voting system is defined by the states. The state, that's in the Constitution, the Article 1 of, yes.
I think it's important to mention that voting in Brazil is mandatory.
Mandatory, yes. That's a huge discussion. So, the vote is mandatory. So everybody over 18 until I think 70 must vote. And people from 16 to 18, they are allowed to vote.
Wow.
But they are not so mandatory. But if you don't vote, the penalties are very, almost insignificant. But it's mandatory. It's a huge discussion.
For another day.
For another day, yes, thank you. But here in the United States, you might know this much better than I do. Every state decides the rules. You have just read this huge discussion in the last national election when Trump was challenging the rules of many states. So every state has its own rules. And through the Electoral College, citizens of different states have also different weights in the electoral system. For instance, Montana, you know how the Electoral College works. So Montana has a very little population. It has one representative, but it has 3 votes in the Electoral College. Because the Electoral College is the sum of the representative plus 2 for every state, which is the number of the senators. So Montana triples its weight in the Electoral College, whereas California, I think California has 53 representatives relative to their population, but it has only 55 delegates to the Electoral College. So if Montana triples the representation in the college, in the Electoral College, California adds 2 or 3%, something like that. So a citizen in Montana is worth more than 2 times more than a citizen in California. So this is not democratic at all.
Yes.
In Brazil, each citizen, one citizen, one vote. So this is but federalism, not only distributes the weight of the population of the citizens unequally among the states, but also federalism also allowed Jim Crow. Because the 15th Amendment, and not only Jim Crow, but also the disenfranchisement of African Americans. Because the 15th Amendment says what? Nobody can be denied the right to vote for race, color, or previous situation of bondage, something like that. So the states in the South, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Florida, what they did? They disenfranchised the African Americans by imposing taxes, poll taxes, and literacy taxes. So this took out of the electorate almost, I have the numbers I can give you afterwards, almost all African Americans in the South who are either too poor to pay the taxes or illiterate. So federalism in Brazil, in the US, is a part of the answer why you have a liberal welfare state. Also, the checks and balances systems, the separation of power, makes the political system in the United States extremely complex, slow, and difficult to build consensus. So, for instance, in Brazil, we also have a presidential system. But in Brazil, the president has a mandate. You say mandate? A mandate of 4 years. The year the president is elected, the House of Representatives is also elected, the very same year. And the representatives in the House, they also have a mandate of 4 years. So there is a coincidence in the elections to the presidency and to the House. And 1/3 of the Senate is elected each 4 years. Here in the US, the president has a mandate of 4 years. The representatives have a mandate of 2 years, meaning that in the midterm of the president, there's a new election to the House. So he has to start all over everything every 2 years. The legislative process has to begin every 2 years. And to make things worse, it's not unusual that when the president is elected, he makes the majority in the House, but in the midterm, when he's more, has many problems and things like that, he loses the majority. So he has to face a government with the opposition, controlling the House, the Congress, the House, the Senate, or both. So the legislative process in the United States, in Brazil, it's slow also. But here, it's very difficult because of this non-coincidence between the mandates of the president and the representatives. To add more difficulty to the problem, this is not a constitutional problem. The states choose along the 19th century and 20th century, they choose a kind of electoral system, which is called the winner takes all. The states choose this kind of,
Just singing the winner takes it all. Well, that's the winter, not the winner. Sorry, Flavio.
The states choose to enhance their power in the Congress. They choose an electoral system called the winner takes all, after explaining the next. And the result of this, the historical result in every country that uses this kind of electoral system is that it has basically 2 parties in parliament, in Congress. Here, Democrats and Republicans. In England, conservatives and labor. Before that, in the US, before Whigs and Democrats. In England, liberals and conservatives. It has basically two parties. So, whereas in Brazil, we have, you are laughing, thanks God we have that, I think. We have another kind of electoral system, which we call proportional system, which has historical result of creating multiple parties, lots of parties in Congress. You have only two, we have many. So each one of these systems, they have advantages and disadvantages. In the case of the United States, which I'm focusing here, the United States is a highly complex country, lots of different interests, different worldviews. You take a country like the size of the United States, the regional diversity, lots of different beliefs, and all of them must be represented in only two parties, either Republicans or Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party, which was the party that led the construction of the American welfare, which is the American Liberal Party, and led the construction of the American welfare state. It was also, until Nixon's Southern strategy in the 70s, it was also the party of segregation in the South. The same party represented labor unions here in the then steel belt, now called the Rust Belt, but represented labor unions here, represented immigrants, ethnic communities here, but it was also the same party that in the South defended segregation. So, it's over?
Apologize, I have a class.
I'll speed up. So, for instance, in the 1930s, during the New Deal, 2/3 of the Democratic Party, 2/3 of the representatives of the Democratic Party were from the South. So when Roosevelt created the when the Democratic Party created the Social Security in 1935, which is the heart of the American welfare system, it excluded agricultural workers and domestic workers, which were by then the heart of African American labor. So I'm gonna hurry up, but this is yes.
Why?
Why what?
Why do you have to hurry?
Because somebody made like this. And
The boss, maybe. Oh, excuse me.
yes.
That's right, one more question. But while you're explaining this, what I'm curious about is, well, what happens with each state? Why are there even states if everything is the way you're explaining it? What responsibilities or what choices do people have that are specific to the state they live in Brazil?
Good question. Very little, actually.
Oh,
They choose the governor.
No,
they have a
no,
governor.
they should just choose the governors. They have they choose their local representatives, but very little in the sense that we have the same laws for all. For instance, our criminal law is the same in the whole country. Here, some states have death penalty,
Right.
others don't. Some states have civil same-sex marriage, others
Right,
don't.
right.
So civil rights and civil laws here are led by states. In Brazil, all these laws are the same for the whole country. Of course, we elect our state governors, we elect, and the states are very different between each other. But the norms, the general norms, the general rules, they are the same in the whole country. The same crimes, the same penalties, the same rights of the citizens, the same weight in the electoral system in the whole country. So now I'm going to hurry up, but because of this, the action of the American state was created very different policies towards different segments of the population. So just to be very, very, what's my limit here?
3 o'clock.
Manuel, when I should shut up, how many time I have left?
30 minutes with the questions and everything.
So I'm going to talk 10 minutes more than we discuss. So what's the core of the American Liberal Project of the Democratic Party? Administrative agencies, which I'm not going to talk about today, Social Security, collective bargaining, National Labor Relations Board, the National Labor Relations Act we were talking about, public spending based on Keynesian economic policies, civil rights, Medicare, Medicaid, these focal public policies. This is the heart of the American system. And rights from the administrative agencies, they were created from the progressive era in the beginning of 20th century, social security from the New Deal on, collective bargaining from the New Deal on, public spending from World War II on, civil rights from 1948 on. 1948 was the first time that the presidential campaign, Truman put civil rights in the Democratic platform, and there the Democratic Party split with the Dixiecrats, and Medicare, Medicaid, and social programs from Great Society on. So the core of American liberalism was built all over many decades, and from the 70s, 80s, and particularly from Clinton on, rights and politics arising from the social movements of the 60s. For women, LGBT, against Vietnam War. So this is the core of American liberalism, but I have to hurry up. So there is this labor historian called Nelson Lichtenstein. Lichtenstein. And he wrote a book called When Affirmative Action Was White. And he says that affirmative action was white in Social Security, which excluded African Americans, and also in the GI Bill of 1944, which created a social welfare system for veterans of the war. Healthcare, now you have this huge administrative veterans, how to say, veterans administration that administers a huge system of welfare for a focus group, veterans of war. So the GI Bill, the Social Security, they were, according to Nelson Lichtenstein, they were affirmative action toward whites. It created, particularly the GI Bill, it helped to create a white middle class. I would add to this also Federal Housing Administration, which funded in the first decade after World War II. Federal Housing Administration funded 13%, 13% of houses in the suburbs for white veterans. The Federal Highway Act of '56, which created the interstate system of highways, that was a subsidy to the suburbanization of white middle class, and even more important, industrial military complex, and after 58, the aerospatial complex, which created, I have the numbers if you want to see after, millions of jobs. It was a political industrial policy. Both the industrial military complex and the aerospace complex were industrial policies to lead the technological innovation, to lead economic growth, but that benefited basically white middle class. I have the numbers if you want to see them later. So here we have Levittown, the paradigm of suburban life after World War II, the industrial military complex, and the interstate system. This was the side of the middle class being benefited by the state. But we also had collective bargaining, supported by the National Labor Relations Board, which was a kind of affirmative action to the white working class, because it defended basically collective bargaining for industrial unions, which were basically white by then. And this system of collective bargaining allowed not only the unionization of the white industrial working class, but it also created a private system of social welfare. Because in these contracts, the workers, they gain not only good wages, but also health plans and pensions, things like that. So a good amount of white workers, they got from private collective bargaining contracts, they got what we have in Brazil through the state, health plan and fund and pensions. So they dispensed, is that right? The provision of the state, because they were able to have access to good pensions and good health plans through their collective contracts, working contracts, protected by the national labor. I love it, but it was good for basically for white workers. And what was happening with African Americans in this very moment? They were under Jim Crow. They couldn't vote because American welfare system was basically structured from the 30s to the 60s, from the New Deal to the Great Society. By this time, along these 30 years, what was happening to African Americans? They were under Jim Crow and they were disenfranchised. They were fighting for civil rights and for voting rights. They were moving from the South, Great Migration in World War II and around World War II and World War I and World War II. They were moving to the Midwest, to Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, and other places, to the West, to the East Coast. They were moving here, going to the inner cities, and they didn't have anything like the affirmative action that white middle class and white working class had. They didn't have. They were not protected. Their unions were not protected by the National Labor Relations Board. They didn't have good jobs in the industrial military complex. They didn't have jobs in the aerospace complex. They didn't have a GI Bill that financed their higher education and their houses in the suburbs. So they got the worst jobs, the worst housing. In the best scenario for them, they got the limited benefits of Social Security. Oh, I have this very, very good definition. In 1967, there was it's called the hot summer of 67 with riots all over America. And Lyndon Johnson, he created this commission called Kerner Commission, to try to understand what had happened, why all these riots happened. And the Kerner Commission, he made, it's amazing, the study they made about African American, the statistics, the political analysis, the historical overview, it's amazing. The work of the report of this Kerner Commission. And in the conclusion, they say, well, what Americans never fully understood, but the Negro cannot forget, is that white society is deeply involved in the ghetto, in the inner city ghettos after World War II. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society tolerates it. So the American welfare system was created and structured in this environment where African Americans were in the ghetto. There were no federal policies for them as there were for white Americans. Because of these institutional characteristics that I have just mentioned. I'm gonna end my talk here with this the outcome of this situation. Recent data. 10% of working age adults are not covered by any health plan in the United States. The United States spends 18% of its GDP with health, but more than 30 million Americans are uncovered by any health plan. It's amazing for a Brazilian looking at this kind of number. It's amazing. Almost 40 million Americans live in poverty. And the concentration of wealth in the United States measured by the Gini index, I don't know if you use it here,
yeah,
but it's an index of concentration of wealth. The closer you get to 1 is more concentration. The closer to 0 is less concentration of wealth. So United States, among the OCDE countries, the United States has one of the largest concentrations of wealth. Yes.
What is it in Brazil?
Even more. In Brazil, we have. I have this map here. I put here. So the United States has a concentration of wealth close to Argentina, Uruguay. The more red, the more concentrated is wealth. So orange, Argentina, Uruguay, Peru, Bolivia. Brazil is like Angola, Mozambique, Colombia, because Brazil has a structure of wages highly concentrated. How Brazil distributes wealth through the social welfare system. So you can be very poor. You may have no wages, for instance. So it shows there, you have no wages, whereas somebody has very high salary. But you and I, or the person who has no salary, no wage, and the one who gets very high salaries, they have the same treatment in the hospital. So it's a way of distributing wealth. It's a non-monetary way to distribute wealth. That's the Brazilian strategy to fight poverty. So even though our Gini index is high, we have the welfare system to indirectly distribute wealth.
It's a lot of English.
A lot of English. Well, I'm doing my best.
You're doing great.
I'm trying. Not having questions? I will be, yes.
I do, one that, especially because you talk about poverty rates in the end, this occurred to me as you were speaking. The idea that Brazil's system of social welfare provides equally for everyone made me think, well, is there poverty in Brazil? Well, in fact, the poverty rate in Brazil is more than twice the poverty rate in the United States. But here's my question. Why give social welfare to wealthy people? When they're wealthy, why not redistribute that to the poorest people who are living?
Excellent question. There's a discussion about it. Because it's written into the Constitution. It's free for everybody. So now there's a very strong social pressure today and projects in Congress to make somebody, if I have a health plan and I go to a public hospital, my health plan must pay the public hospital, or I will be transferred to a private hospital. But it has to be an amendment to the Constitution. So amending our Constitution is much easier than amending yours. Way easier. But it's not so easy either. Because we have this very strong feeling that this is a social right. It's a citizen's right to have access to these services. But you're right, Brazilian poverty is very high. So, how to distribute income? Nobody has the answer, the best answer.
Or government money, social services.
Yes, that's the Brazilian strategy. But that's the Brazilian strategy. But the thing is, this strategy doesn't always show in the numbers, because the person who gets free medical care in a hospital, his wage is still low. So he will show here that the concentration of income, because Gini index measures income. So my wage is very low. Brazil's wages are very low. Appears here in the Gini index. But I have access to health. I have access to education. I have access to other services. It doesn't show in the index Gini, but it's an indirect form of distributing wealth. But it's a very slow process. Because,
And we also know here in America, people with lower incomes have far worse health outcomes also.
yes,
So that must be true in Brazil also. So it's ironic. Yes, they have health care, but their health is worse because they're living in poverty.
yes, they access much more the health system than middle class people. Poor people in Brazil, they have much more health problems. And also here,
Yes.
then like chronic diseases, high blood pressure, diabetes, this kind of heart problems, this kind of health problems that are linked to eating habits, lack of exercise, things like that. It has a very class distinction in the United States and in Brazil. The poor people in Brazil are much more likely to have this kind of health problem than middle class or rich people. So poor people, they demand the social welfare system much more than middle class or rich people. But middle class and rich people in Brazil, they also access the SUS, the Sistema Único de Saúde, the universal healthcare system, as I mentioned, in accidents in the streets, or for highly complex diseases, like transplants. In Brazil, we have a national, I don't know how it works here, but in Brazil, we have a national list regulated by the central government for every organ ready for transplant. So doesn't matter if you are rich or if you're in each organ has a protocol of priorities. So for instance, heart. If you are in the line for transplant, the doctors decided that you had to have a transplant of the heart. There's a protocol. But I don't know, I don't understand, but there's a protocol. Every Brazilian citizen who needs to have a heart transplant gets in this line and must respect this protocol. No, it doesn't matter if you are rich or if you are poor. There was last year, there was the newspaper of the year previous year, the newspaper, there was this news about this extremely rich guy. He owns a chain. Did you see that?
No, see,
Who was that?
you photo.
Oh, Fausto is an example, but not all the other. He had to have I think a kidney transplant. I think it was the owner of a chain of stores, something like that. And he was operating. He got into the line, and Fausto is a very famous showman in Brazil, and we had to have a heart transplant. So he got into the line. Had to wait for his turn. It's a national regulated system and everybody has rich or poor. So it's a kind of way of distributing wealth. Yes.
I found your presentation really interesting and your topic especially interesting to have a Brazilian perspective on the United States, because we here in the United States look at the world through our navel and don't have that. I had the fortune to live in Brazil where I could follow what Brazilians thought of the United States. Before I get to my question, I also loved your first slide, those 3 authors, and I'd like a copy of that. I'd love to. So when I lived in Brazil, everybody wanted to come to the United States and everybody thought that the streets here were paved with gold. And I always told people that that was the Hollywood perspective because they watch a lot of movies and what they see in the movies is a particular view of the United States. In your experience, has the Brazilian, not academics, I'm glad that you all created your group that's looking at the United States, but for the general population, has the view changed of the United States from inside Brazil? For the younger generation, is it different? With the wars now, is it different? How is Brazil perceived today?
Good question. You want to answer?
You guys are Brazilian in the room. Answer that. I would say unfortunately no. There's obviously kind of a class difference and an education difference in this response, but from a basic kind of my circle of people and what I know, there's still very much a stereotype or a view of the United States being kind of this, not necessarily progressive, but this country with many good things. So it happens a lot that when I go back, I'm like, oh my God, how is it? Everything's great. I'm like, yes, there's good things, but there's also this and this and this and this. They're like, oh, I had no idea. So unfortunately, not yet. I think what we still get from the media, the American media influence in Brazil for the youth is huge. And so it's kind of this contrast. It's still, I think what we still get is a lot of this one-sided biased view, at least in my perspective.
I have some students in Brazil, younger than Stella, 18, 19, 20. And you mentioned something very important, because American movies, they are the creator, the source of historical imagination for many people. So last semester, I was teaching American history, and I like to mention movies, American movies in the class. And I mentioned a movie called Thomas Jefferson's phrase, I know in Portuguese, em busca da felicidade, in search of happiness.
Pursuit of happiness.
In pursuit of happiness, thank you.
Will Smith.
Will Smith, yes. And have you seen this movie?
Yes.
My students, they think that America is that's the rule, that's not the exception. That's the rule. If you go to America, you can ascend socially. It's an open country for. You agree with that? At all? So this is the view for many Brazilian youngsters that the United States is a country open to opportunity. If you work hard, if you you will. Now, maybe Brazil has a very big immigration to America now, and even though many people don't rise socially here, many Brazilians work in civil construction and things like that. But if you make a contrast between what they make here, how much money they make here, and how much money they make in Brazil, and their standard of living here and their standard of living in Brazil, they make much more money here, and they live more. Huh? Yes.
Yeah, just to actually jump in on this because just I've met some Brazilians some months ago, and I was struck by the fact that they didn't speak any word of English at all. I was like, why are you here? And they didn't come from the poorest part of the Brazilian society. But nevertheless, they did not have like a day of the week to take off to rest. But nevertheless, they were like, "Oh, I'm doing great here." Oh my God! So and I was surprised that because like, okay, I was fun talking to them like, "Oh, there's no big Brazilian community here in Pittsburgh." And the answer that I got was, "Well, it's because if you are a legal migrant here, it's more difficult to buy a house or to buy a car in Pennsylvania. But in other states, it's easier." It's like, how did this guy know about that? And the answer is because a lot of people that come from, let's say, low middle class background, not necessarily with the working class background, they came here with this kind of illusion or dream that the American dream really is a reality for everybody. And that answers perhaps your question about it, because and these people are living here in this city. Not many of them, because some of them are illegal, so it's harder to live here.
You know what? I part of our history about immigration, about another immigration story, to see how these dreams work. In Brazil, in Rio, I come from Rio. In Rio, it's very common for the buildings, the condos, they have doormen. They have doormen and they have janitors, you say? Janitors. So, some 30 years ago, I was talking to a young guy, and many people who works as doormen in janitor jobs in Rio, they come from the northeast of Brazil, which is the poorest region in Brazil. And I was talking to this young boy, 20 years old. He was a janitor in the building I used to live. And his bedroom was very small and dark, not somber place, very well. And I asked him, I was talking to him and I asked him where he was from. He was from Pernambuco, from the backlands of Pernambuco. And his parents were agricultural workers. And I asked him if his house in Pernambuco wasn't that more space, more light than his place in Rio, his bedroom in Rio. And he answered, well, yes, I had more food there. I had more space, more clean air. But here, I bought a pair of sneakers because in Pernambuco, his family doesn't deal with money. They plant, they milk the cow, but they don't have money. It's not a monetary economy in some places in the Northeast, 30 years ago. In Rio, he had a wage, so he could buy a pair of sneakers, and during the weekends, he could walk along Atlantic Avenue, which is the beachfront avenue in Rio, in the South Zone, in the fanciest neighborhood in Rio. He would walk and see all the soap opera stars. So for him, like for many Brazilians who come here, they buy a car, they buy cell phone, I don't know. Their dreams fulfilled with is fulfilled. American dreams, even though they are in the bottom of the inequality, as they were in Brazil. But they have access to more stuff than they have in Brazil, because it's a much richer country.
Taking into account time, I invite you to stay around if you can and engage with Flavio, who will also be here through the weekend. I want to thank you for coming, for joining us this event. Just a quick plug on the 29th, we have the Border to Border series, inaugural event. The 26th, we have both slavery and memorializations and terminals. But for now, thank you very much, Flavio.